America, America, wake up, oh, can't you see? Those we elect do not protect our precious liberty. UN is un-American, unconstitutional, unfree. It brings the new world order to take freedom from you and me. There's no UN in American, there's no red in their white and blue to tell of all the bloodshed that bought freedom from me and you. America, America, it's up to you and me. Stand up and fight, take back our rights. We must keep America free.
America's judgments, what lies ahead? A lack of food, by design we believe. Enemy troops, which means the emergence of law enforcement and military together, both foreign and domestic. Military equipment, old style and new, both foreign and domestic. Biological chemical warfare that's been played on you and I, America, for at least the last 50 years. Now, why would someone or a group of people want to do that to their fellow Americans? Before we get into that, we're going to research those questions, in particular, why they would want to do that. Negative Population Growth Incorporated, out of Teaneck, New Jersey, has this to say: how can we put an end to mass starvation and suffering in this world? There is only one answer, and this is what they say the answer is. When you think about it, the only answer to human suffering on a frightful scale is drastic reduction in numbers of people. Logic says there can be no other solution. Let me go into the document a little further here. This is what they have to say their long-range goals are going to be. To sustain U.S. population at a smaller, more sustainable level, they require no more than 150 million for the United States. For the world, the total population, they want it to be not more than 2 billion people. Their interim steps to accomplish this: to create in the United States a new cabinet-level Department of Population. Going down here just a little bit. In its place, give a federal income tax credit only to those parents who have not more than 2 children. Anyone else would lose their tax credits entirely. Now, quoting from another organization, the Cobden Clubs, which U.S. Congressman Gephardt out of Missouri is part of. This is his phone number here till it got disconnected recently. Secretariat of the World, the pressing need, it says. The time is pressing. The Club of Rome was founded in 1968. Limits to Growth were written in 1971. Global 2000 was written in 79, but insufficient progress has been made in population reduction. They require the immediate reduction of world population. This must be done by whatever means necessary, they say. Compulsory cooperation is not debatable with 166 nations. Now, quoting from page 5, let me show you this. Therefore, the following policy must be implemented. The Secretary Council of the United Nations, led by the Anglo-Saxon major nation powers, will decree that henceforth the Security Council will inform all nations that its sufferance on population has ended. That all nations have quotas for reduction on a yearly basis, which will be enforced by the Secretary Council by selective or total embargo of credit, items of trade including food and medicine, or by military force when required. Paragraph B. The Secretary Council of the UN will inform all nations that outmoded notions of national sovereignty will be discarded, and that the Secretary Council has complete legal, military, and economic jurisdiction in any region of the world, and that this will be enforced by major nations of the Security Council. Paragraph C. The Secretary Council of the UN will take possession of all natural resources, including the watersheds and great forests, to be used and preserved for the good of major nations of the Security Council. Paragraph D. The Security Council of the UN will explain that not all races and peoples are equal, nor should they be. Those races proven superior by superior achievements ought to rule the lesser races. And these treasonous jerks have the audacity to call me a racist? Everything that we've discovered about them is what they accuse us of being. That's the smokescreen to keep them from getting into the limelight. Paragraph E. All of the above constitute the New World Order, in which order all nations, regions, and races will cooperate with the decisions of the major nations of the Security Council. They talk about the action delayed could well be fatal. All could be lost if mere opposition to minor races is tolerated. They talk about an open declaration of intent followed by decisive force is the final solution. Where have we heard that before? This must be done before any shock hits our financial markets, tarnishes our credibility, and perhaps diminishes our force. Well, let's assist in diminishing their dirty force. So back to America's judgments. The subject that we're going to talk about first is the lack of food. The lack of food caused by whatever means that we can determine here. Back in 1982, the Reader's Digest had an article, Food, America's Secret Weapon. In a world where food is becoming as valuable as energy, the awesome abundance of American farms is finally being seen in its true light, as a source of power, a means to profit, and a weapon for peace. Well, it just so happens since the early 80s, the American farm is all but extinct, dropping up to 3,000 per week through foreclosures or whatever means possible to get them off to form this corporate America that we suffer from today. From the Tampa Tribune, January of last year, is an interesting comment. Grain shortage growing problem. Conditions indicate that there is at least some vulnerability in the food supply. From the Associated Press, Wichita, Kansas. Kansas harvest to hit a 30-year low. A record drought, temperature extremes, insects have hammered the Kansas wheat crop to what may be its smallest harvest since 1957. Now, Washington State has a problem with their seeds for the wheat. State banned Southwest wheat seed. This was in the Spokesman Review, May of '96. Action taken to safeguard Washington crop from fungus. Carnal bunt, a fungus that damages crops. The spores can live, the spores can live in the soil and on equipment and may be spread by wind. The disease is named after a city in India where the fungus was first discovered. As we go through this presentation, I'll show you where it really came from, right here in the USSA. One of the strangest springs ever, according to this farmer from North Carolina. Peach farmer Arthur Black says his harvest is down from 30 varieties to 2. Summer without peach pie, without cobbler or peach ice cream. Look, that's trivial stuff right now. For peach farmers all over the Southwest, the real problem will be a year without income. Everybody is hurt, and I mean bad hurt, says Wayne Mack, Director of the Marketing for the South Carolina Department of Agriculture. From the Western Producer, July of '96, the headlines read, the Ukraine harvest likely headed for disaster. Kiev, Ukraine. The Ukraine, once the breadbasket of Europe and producer of a quarter of the former Soviet Union's grain, faces a disastrous harvest this year. Now, I probably don't have to remind all of you that once upon a time in Ukraine, there was a giant shortage of food there by design. The videotape that we handled called Harvest of Despair, which was put together by the relatives of the survivors, says this. This film documents the Ukraine terror famine of 1932-33, which caused the deaths of 7 million people. The terror famine was deliberately created by the Soviet government as part of Stalin's decade-long effort to destroy the Ukraine peasantry who resisted the forced collectivization of their lands. Today we would call that corporate. Same difference in America. Now from the Wall Street Journal, January of '96, this is what it read in regards to food. Blueprint for managed food care. Controlling the food supply. From a person by the name of Lee Walsh, he writes an article called Weather Control. I'll just quote this caption here. To control weather is to control mankind, its health, life, behavior, and death. To control weather is to control the economy of any nation, the food chain, the water supply, the air we breathe, and all the natural resources that mankind needs for survival. Weather modification, 15 United States Code, Section 330. Public Law 92205, which is classified to this chapter, is popularly known as the Weather Modification Reporting Act of 1972. Also along with that, we have the Weather Modification Reporting Act of 1974, or 76 rather, which is 94-490, October 13th of 76. Now, I was in the military. I was in the Naval Air Force, and I was part of the weather modification program out of Washington, D.C. back in the 60s, so I know it's real. Department of the Air Force, Phillips Laboratory, October 12th of 95. It was written to one of our associates in Montana. For his sake, I blocked his name out. This is in response to a newsletter that we had put out about weather modification. You ask if the information in the militiamen's newsletter article was true. It is true that the Department of Defense is developing a site near the village of Gracona. The site is for our HAARP, H-A-A-R-P program, which is a research project to better understand the ionosphere and impart its effects on communications. Yeah, well, let me tell you, that's a tiny part of it, folks. While there are some very superficial similarities between our research and Eastland's theories, the two projects are not related in any sense. Well, Eastland doesn't quite feel that way. He's been on A&E television talking about the patents that the Air Force is using of his. This is just one of them here. These are some of the other patents. This project has also been shown on many other television programs, including NBC's cable network, CNBC, on a program called Sightings. These patents go on that he feels is being infringed upon. Now, the funding for this, here's part of it right here. National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 95, Committee on the Armed Services, United States Senate. Going into the document, it'll show here the actual name, HAARP, High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program. In this program, they talk about the promising results of the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program. This transmitter in Alaska, besides providing a world-class research facility for ionospheric physics, could allow Earth-penetrating tomography over most of the northern hemisphere. Such a capability would permit the detection and precise location of tunnels, shelters, and other underground shelters. The absence of such a capability has been noted as a serious weakness in the Department of Defense plan for precision attacks on hardened targets. In the year 95, they were talking about $90 million to put it together. But the project has since mushroomed since then. They were talking about 160 towers back then. Now they're up to 350 towers. Giant towers. Now, to prove my point even further, Popular Science has got an article in it of the same topic. September 95 issue. It's the secret agenda of a military project in Alaska. And going into the document a little bit, it's written by a man by the name of Farmer. This is page 81, the bottom left-hand paragraph. It says, differential heating of areas of the atmosphere could induce local weather conditions such as floods or droughts, useful to the military. How so? Smooth seas might suddenly be raked by tremendous or treacherous swells, creating or denying a tactical advantage. Now, when you come up to the location, the base in Gracona, Alaska, which was intended to be an over-the-horizon base but never materialized, so they either had to do something with it or give it back to the state. The reason they placed it there is for two basic reasons that I understand. One is the magnetic lines of the Earth line up perfectly there, and the other is the unlimited supply of natural gas for their power plants to generate this energy. HAARP Research Station, Gracona, Alaska. And this is a picture of their towers. They're all roughly 72 feet tall. This is a man standing at the base of it, a trailer equivalent to the size of a semi. But they're just all over the space, all over the place, arrayed in funny patterns. Now, according to this document, Center for Aerospace Doctrine, Research, and Education, produced in 1982, but printed for release in 1986. Low-intensity conflict and modern technology. Lieutenant Colonel David J. Dean, U.S. Air Force editor. This is to disrupt human thinking and debilitate military troops is the intent of this book, which we believe leads into the HAARP program, the HAARP operations that the military is not telling us. But the curious thing in this is the foreword is written by Congressman Newt Gingrich, so obviously our Congress knows about it. Now, some of the things that we're noticing around communities, especially when we were in California here a few months ago, is the strange cloud formations that seem to grow from military aircraft having passed over the area. Now, this is an aircraft that just flew in this funny loop formation here, and another one you can see going across here. But after that's been in the sky for a while, the sky becomes full of clouds. from what we believe is this military fuel that's being burned. And shortly after that, according to certain doctors that we communicated with as late as today, their patients become very ill and don't show up for their appointments right after the planes have passed over. Now, these are talking papers on what we're talking about, the military fuel, JP8-100, which is a new fuel that's used in the F-22s, F-16s, etc. You got to wonder why these aircraft are crashing so frequently. This could be one of the reasons, because this fuel allows water to go right through the filters, hence the potential for crash. So our pilots in the military, I mean, there are sons and daughters. We ought to be concerned about them too, and how they suffer along with the civilian population. Now, here's another article that can be causing our sickness. With overwhelming results, these research we've done this last year has indicated lung infections all over the country at an alarming rate. It doesn't matter where you're from, and I believe that JP8-100 is part of it. But I think another thing that showed up in our local Missoulian newspaper is MTBE, an additive to the fuel of automobiles to stop pollution, etc., I think is doing its damage. This is a testimony of several witnesses that had to either move out of the area or have temporarily moved during the wintertime because of the poisons in the air from this fuel that's being burned. And people are saying it's literally devastated my life. Going on with the weather modification, this is a picture of a fluorescent cloud. Without the sun anywhere near it, it's lighting up like it's plugged into something. We have video footage that shows an untold amount of strange cloud formations, even to the picture of a man coming at you in the clouds. Is that the rapture we're talking about? Out of Arizona, I believe it is, Scottsdale, Arizona, it shows a cover of a newspaper there with a strange lightning storm. Now, I grew up in Tornado Alley in northern Minnesota, and I got to see a lot of strange storms, but I've never seen anything like what I've seen the last few years, with a dozen bolts of lightning coming out of a cloud at a time. It's just very unnatural. And clouds that are mobile or portable, actual hollow clouds, this was taken by people in South Dakota, and as they watched and were taking these pictures, in horror they saw 3 gunships come out of this portable cloud. Silent gunships came right at them out of the cloud, then disappeared back in the cloud, and the cloud moved on. What do we have to look forward to, folks? If you want more information on that, there's a book available from some very special people in Alaska that have been keeping track of the HARP program. Angels Don't Play This HARP. It's by Nick Begich. Shifting gears just a little bit, I want to share what the land grabbers, that's what we call the global people, is the global grabbers, land grabbers, have been doing through the Bureau of Land Management. This is in our newsletter, Taking Aim. The BLM rules threaten Americans' freedom. Let me just skip around here a little bit. Now, this program came out about 3 years ago in the Federal Register, sponsored by the Forest Service. At the time, it was at page number 5,800. Now it's at 57,600. What's in between those two sets? That's almost 50,000 pages of more bureaucracy. See, the way they accomplish this is to hide it in the Federal Register, hoping that there won't be any public outcry from it, and after 60 days it becomes law. So they say. Anyhow, the pages numbered listed are the Federal Register. 57605, criminal penalties regarding federal resources are expanded from $1,000 in 12 months in prison to $500,000 in 5 years in prison. They talk about the BLM. Law enforcement authorities expanded beyond activities occurring on BLM land. Under this language, activities on private land adjacent to and upstream from BLM lands fall under BLM law enforcement authority. The definition of pollute or contaminate water means to discharge or place in water among other things, rock, sand, cellar dirt, or agricultural waste. So if your child picks up a rock and skips it on the water, you're probably going to go to jail. Going on with the same document, on page 57,612, we find this: the definition of primitive area no longer has to be roadless. How can it be called a primitive area then? They apparently don't care. Obviously, we can see through the smoke screen. It's a land-grabbing mechanism. Going on, Unless authorized by the BLM, you cannot discharge a firearm. How do you protect yourself against the bear that's coming at you, or a cougar? Going down to near the bottom of the page here. You cannot operate a vehicle in any manner causing or likely to cause a disturbance to the soil, water, wildlife, or wildlife habitat. In other words, if your car is sitting there idling and you turn the steering wheel back and forth, you've disturbed the soil because it rearranges the soil. Going back up to the top of the page here in the center, without BLM authorization, you cannot deface, remove, or destroy natural features or resources, including plants or their parts, soil, rocks, or minerals. The last one I'll talk about here. Without BLM authorization, you cannot divert, transport, or remove any water resources owned by or reserved to the United States and administered by the BLM. So if you get thirsty when you're on BLM property and you need to take a drink of water, you better stay there till you leave it. Now, Executive Order 12919 makes the point very clear. This is where Clinton bypasses Congress through his martial law rule. Executive Order 12919 was signed into law May 1994. On page 11, paragraph M, it says this. Now, he's given all of the authority possible to FEMA, or Federal Emergency Management Agency, to regulate you and I. Water resources means all usable water from all sources within the jurisdiction of the United States, which can be managed, controlled, or allocated to meet emergency requirements. You can't go very far without water, can you, folks? It's very essential to life. This is what the BLM now says. Secretary Babbitt directs the BLM to halt action, go back to the drawing board with law enforcement regulations. The people win round one at the BLM. That's great. Now, San Francisco has had a problem for quite a number of years. It's called the Estuary Project. There was an MD by the name of F.H. Ernst from Vallejo, I'm not sure how you say that, California. Vallejo, thank you very much. On 10/20/92, and this is what he has to say. An EPA master plan to put California on permanent water rationing, to break all water rights or contracts in Central Valley watershed, to place the delta levees at major risk, return the delta to swamp status. Do you recall in 1997 what happened? The levees failed, didn't they? They couldn't repair them. They couldn't keep the gophers from digging holes in them. So the water washed them away. And now because of these laws, they cannot repair them. So guess who's going to starve? That's where most of our winter crops come from, isn't it? Now that land is returned back to the wetlands because water will stand within 18 inches of the top of the soil for a certain period of time. Now to prove my point a little further on control of our private land, this is what comes out with the tax papers in Montana now to the property tax owners. How does your property fit in? It's part of an ecosystem. This is from New York State, from Delaware County Times. It says this: to halt the biosphere plan, the attack comes from all directions. Just when it seems one siege has been beaten back, up comes another from an unknown flank. This is from Delaware County Board Chairman Raymond M. Christensen. But it doesn't end there, folks. This is what the sign looks like at Glacier National Park right now. United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. Glacier National Park is recognized as part of the International Network of Biosphere Reserves. That's in northern Montana. This is on the East Coast. Great Smoky Mountain National Park, an International Biosphere Reserve. That was taken in 1994. Now this one is Mount Mitchell State Park, North Carolina, United Nations Biosphere Reserve. U.S. Congressman Tom Colburn, Congress of the United States, House of Representatives, October 16th, 1996. I'll quote from this paragraph here. Currently, 68% of our national parks, preserves, and monuments are designated as United Nations World Heritage Sites. Biosphere reserves are both. Currently, there are 47 biosphere reserves in the United States, which in total cover an area about the size of Colorado, our fourth largest state. Furthermore, over $700,000 of your tax dollars were used to fund the biosphere program last year. All of this without approval from Congress. Who are these clowns? Now that's not enough. Here's a sketch of the Northwest The plan to protect biodiversity. Now, we live in this blackened out area in northwest Montana right here, and this is what it says about the color code of this map. The Corps reserves no use whatsoever. That means crisis relocation. They're, by design, crises are relocation, like Cambodia, I suppose. The corridors, extremely limited use. That's the darker gray areas. And the lighter gray areas are the buffer zones, very limited use. It just so happens that the white areas where human habitation is still allowed has very little or no water in it. Senator Burns also has something to say about that. He calls UNESCO intrusive. While I understand the extent of American treaty commitments to the United Nations, I do not believe these commitments were intended to allow any international body to undercut our domestic policy. Surprise, surprise, Mr. Burns. The concept of creating buffer zones to expand the borders of our national parks sets a dangerous precedence. Now, President Clinton has made sure that his cronies that grabbed that $1 trillion worth of coal in the state of Utah are protected. Through this executive order 12986, January 18th of 96, he did this. International Union for Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources. Me as president, I hereby extend to the International Union for Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources the privileges and immunities that provide or pertain to immunity from suit. How do you think the people of Utah feel about that? The global grabbers. This is a picture of an underground facility manned by FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency, in Springfield, Missouri, one of 50-some of these across the country. This is the tree line, or the ground line above. This is the hood of a semi. The passenger took the picture. There's a semi coming at you in the center of that picture, out of a tunnel, by the way. As you get into the tunnel further, there's another semi coming at them. The traffic was heavy that day, and there's one that just crossed their path in another tunnel. This is one of many across America. We got this from a private trucker out of North Dakota that realized something strange was going on here when it was, his hauling was done by UN codes, by the way. Now, this is a food mill, a rice mill in Texas, to be specific. It's Lindsay Mill in northwest Harris County, Texas. Up until late last year, they had no fences at all. Now they have an 8-foot cyclone fence with razor military wire around it. What's wrong with this picture? What's going on here? So you've got to wonder, when a person by the name of Catherine Brittany, the executive director of the United Nations World Food Program, makes this statement. Food is power. We use it to change behavior. Some may call that bribery. We do not apologize. I find it extremely sick and repugnant. So my suggestion to you folks is to start putting your food away now. Thank you very much.
When your wife and kids are happy, blessed with 3 square meals a day, your home is warm and cozy, and you earn a living wage. When your health is all it should be, and your water's safe to drink, don't take these things for granted. It's later than you think. Everybody has an appetite, their favorite kind of breed. Some men have a craving for much more than they need. America, you're watching history repeat itself. Read the story about the Romans in the Bible on the shelf.